Everyone, welcome to our panel about problematic creators and coping with that, what to do when something you love is problematic in content or the creator has become problematic in some way. My name is Tanya Cook. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a sociology professor and I teach at the Community College of Aurora near Denver, Colorado. I also research fandom, especially fandom-based activism and charity work. So I'd like to take a moment and let the panelists introduce themselves, and let's start with Hansi, please.
Hi. So I've been to Whedoncon before, so it's great to be back. I'm a filmmaker, fangirl. I make fandom documentaries. So there's, transmedia documentaries. And I'm really interested in talking about this topic because I've been coping with this a lot myself right now. Jacob?
Thank you. Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Drucker. I go by Jen Watcher Tonks. I am a huge Harry Potter fan. I am a Hufflepuff. I often am a Harry Potter cosplayer for children's charity events. I'm a graphic designer, illustrator. I love all kinds of fandoms. And I miss cons very much, but I hope that they will safely come back.
Thank you. Chris.
My name is Christopher Cullen, pronouns he, him, his. I am actually on the con committee for Whedoncon, and I'm a big Buffy and Angel fan, especially. And I also do, I'm sometime creator and do film work mostly in art departments.
Great, thank you. And Debbie.
Oh, hi, I'm Debby Dodds. I am a fangirl of all Whedon things, she, hers, her, and I'm also an author and published author of Amish Guys Don't Call, and it was truly one of the highlights of my life that it got blurbed by both Amber Benson and Felicia Day, so that was really exciting. As a fangirl trying to be a professional author, I was like, oh, well, how lovely. But inside I was screaming. And I also work as a private tutor, creative writing teacher. I used to work at Disneyland and Disney World as a performer. And I did a lot of B horror films. So I had a career before writing as an actress.
Wow, thank you. Kathleen.
My name's Kathleen O'Shea David, she, her, hers. I was a book editor at Del Rey Books. I still sometimes dip my toe back in there when they need something on Star Wars. I am a published writer. I'm a master puppeteer. I had a long career in film, television, and theater doing various jobs, and I'm an equity stage manager.
Thank you. And Lynn?
Hi, I'm Lynn Zubernis. I am a clinical psychologist and a university professor, and I'm also a very passionate fan, pronouns she, her, hers. And recently, I have written a bunch of books about the television show Supernatural. That is my research line, fan psychology, but it's also the show I'm really passionate about, including the most recent one, which was written with the actors of the show and the fans of the show. So many of the show's actors actually wrote their own chapters. That is called There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. I'm proud of it, especially because as Supernatural is ending, it's been really a source of comfort and kind of inspiration to sort of get people through a hard time, because our fandoms are really important to us. So the big loss, either when something becomes problematic or it just ends its 15-year run.
Absolutely, thank you. And Jacob.
Hi, I'm Jacob Womack, he, him, his. I'm a cosplayer. Before that, I was a stagehand for 10 years off Broadway in New York and for the Kennedy Center, did national tours. So I kind of approach it from that way. Grew up a fan, was watching Next Generation in the womb, according to my mother. But yeah, big fantasy fan, love Whedon, cried when Firefly went off the air. My wife is a huge Buffy fan. We're currently in our 3rd or 9th rewatch. It's much closer to 9th. So we're a big fan of it. Huge J.K. Rowling fan. Was the only person over 6 feet in line for the midnight release of Prisoner of Azkaban. So I have more than my fair share of experience with loving something that does have a problematic source.
Thank you. And so our first question is just essentially to discuss how to cope when that work you love is problematic. So let's focus first on the work, on the content of the work briefly, and then we'll move into creators. And actually, we're going to go in reverse order if I can remember it. So we'll start with Jacob.
I mean, it's always difficult when you're reading something, especially because I'm a huge fantasy sci-fi reader. So you'll be reading a story and you'll be halfway immersed into it, and then suddenly one of the characters does something that you're like, oh, but I was in this world and now I'm back on my couch feeling angry. And that it's always really jarring. Like you kind of develop a little bit of a shell for it when you're reading really older stuff. Like, I mean, like Mark Twain, like we all read that in coming up, and you're like, oh yeah, you wouldn't write that now. There's no way you'd get away with that. So it's, like if it's Jules Verne, I'm like, oh yeah, sure. I kind of expect misogyny to be baked in. But when I'm reading something that came out after 2000, it's really problematic and jarring, and it's also happening so much faster. And part of that's just the internet, part of that's social media, but it's just the ability for something to get noticed and then for it to be pointed out to thousands and then the entire fan base has really accelerated it. And I think that's kind of why there's this idea that it's something a new problem. It's just like a lot of problems that have been around for hundreds of years. It's just happening faster and louder. So it's, I mean, problematic work has been around for ages. It's often a reflection of its time. And it kind of creates the opportunity to re-examine what was wrong and as a way to improve. You got to build from somewhere. But yeah, it's always really weird when you see something that feels incredibly outdated and something that's supposedly a modern work.
Thank you. And next would be Lynn.
Why it's such a big deal and why it shouldn't be dismissed is because the things that we are really fanish about, the things we really fall in love with, as opposed to something that you read casually or you watch casually, maybe then it doesn't bother you so much. Maybe then you can easily go, this isn't going where I wanted it to go. I'm going to put it aside. But when you love something, that fictional world becomes legitimately important to you. I mean, there's research that shows that we get the same kind of brain chemicals going on when we're immersed in our favorite fictional world as we do when we're sitting down to like Thanksgiving dinner with our families or found families or friends. So this is a really important thing, and it's very difficult for humans to compartmentalize effectively enough that we can take a few little problematic bits, whatever they are, out of it and still remain immersed in it in the way that we want to in order to feel good about it. So I think when people are sort of cavalier or dismissive about, just ignore that, you can still, you can get past that and still love the thing. Maybe not. That's not so easy for people, and it's something that's important. It's kind of a safe space for many people, whatever we've become fanish about. So if suddenly that space doesn't feel so safe because of something in it that's threatening or problematic, that can have a really big psychological impact on people. So I think it's an important thing to talk about and to validate people's feelings when they do really struggle with something like this.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. I admit to having my own struggle to still love Harry Potter at this point, but we can come back to that. Thank you, Kathleen.
Well, I was thinking about this because I happen to know I'm older than all of you. That the book that I had to separate the author from the book was The Mist of Avalon, which I adored as a teenager. But the more and more you learned about the family, it got harder and harder to read. I reread it recently. It's still a good book, but now it has some baggage it didn't have before. I have a feeling if I reread the Harry Potter books, it's going to be lurking in the back of my mind, even though there are some Dumbledore's gay. It's just there's some things in there that's kind of now raise eyebrows that formerly didn't. I have learned to separate the person from the work, and I've had to in the publishing industry just for my sanity. There are some authors out there that are cuckoo bananas, they write magnificently, but you have to deal with them. You know, the rest of the world doesn't know they're cuckoo bananas, but they are. You know, and then you have the ones who think they walk on water because they've had 2 New York Times bestsellers. You know, so, you know, I just have learned to just separate it, you know, but occasionally it's like in the back of my head, like with the Mist of Avalon going, yeah, I sort of wonder what was going on when she was writing this.
True. Thank you. Debbie.
Hi. It's funny you brought up Mist of Avalon. Hansi and I were talking about that the other day. That's one that I can't. Like, I loved it when I was little. I cannot now, knowing what I know about what was going on behind the scenes with that author. But there are things that I can. And I came up with something that I ask people when they talk to me about problematic literature. I say, is your sense of nostalgia for this more important than your compassion about other people's feelings? And I think we do have to ask ourselves that. And it's maybe not a black and white question, and it sounds kind of harsh because you can still have nostalgia, obviously, and have a sense of compassion for people's feelings. But I think everybody has their line where they're like, I can't, that's a line I'm not going to cross, and it might be different. And instead of thinking about maybe what triggers us, to think about what is having an effect on other people, and is it really worth it to perpetuate that? I think that that's something that you need to ask yourself. And my big wake up moment came, as I said, I'm a giant Whedon fan, and one of the things I was looking forward to so much was my daughter watching Buffy. In fact, I stopped watching Buffy for 10 years. I didn't watch it, and I waited until she was 11, almost 12, and we sat down and we started watching it. And I found I had to keep pausing things and going, okay, well, let me talk to you about this thing. Because she was impressionable and she was young and she knew this was mommy's favorite. I've got a big tattoo on my arm. She knew that this was my thing. And there were, words or things that came out that I was like, oh boy. And at first I was saying, well, it was the time. And I found that I had to stop doing that and say, you know what, I wish I knew better then. Instead of justifying it by, oh, it was, the late 90s or whatever, I would say, I wish I knew what I knew back then now. I'm not going to justify it. I'm just going to say, I wish we had all been more conscious of things. So.
I think that's a really great point of considering sort of how we socialize the next generation, if you will, of fans, and acknowledging, hey, I did love this, and you're probably going to experience this as well. Something you love will turn out to have an element of toxicity or negativity to it, and how do you cope with that? And acknowledge, hey, we can learn, we can grow. This at the time, I wish I had known how problematic this was. I had that reaction to Star Wars recently, the older movies. I was like, I loved Han Solo. I was a kid, but I was like, I'm going to marry Harrison Ford. That's going to happen somehow. And it didn't, obviously. But and I was rewatching it, and his dynamic with Leia is hella toxically masculine.
Oh my gosh. And I was reading her book about their affair when she was a young actress, that definitely colors it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We had a discussion about Willow, and Dory was like, well, is she bi or is she gay? And I was like, well, that's, if she calls herself gay, then she's gay. And then Dory's like, maybe she's pan. And I was like, oh, we didn't even have pan back then. So but it was nice because it did make a conversation. We had it, we just didn't have a word for it, but it made an interesting conversation for us. So there's that.
Thank you. Chris, I think, is next. Christopher, sorry.
I would love to build on what Debbie said, because you really struck on something that I always dwell on, whether healthy or unhealthy, the period. So every single piece of art is a period piece. Everything. This panel's a period piece. We might feel differently about everything we're about to say when we watch this a year from now. And so there is so much lurking behind that. You talk about Buffy, and I'm actually really love what you said, this spin about how you stopped apologizing for it and you said, I wish I knew then what I knew now. And what I like the most about that attitude is that sometimes you can also apply it to the artist or the creator. There are times when you can't. A couple people have mentioned Harry Potter and like things that we're seeing in new light because something has maybe come out. But when you think about something like Buffy that's 25 years old, then I think that we as a society look at it and just wish we knew now or knew then what we knew now. And I think that that brings me from, I think Debbie steers me, that period piece thing that you really struck on, to my other thing that I get caught up in a lot. Like I'm sort of confessing my own obsessions that are maybe flaws here right off the bat. I get obsessed with period piece and authorial intent. And so these are the two things that like consume me when I'm trying to decide whether or not I have to separate the author from the art. That like, is this problematic because 1996 is incredibly problematic and human beings are flawed and we all learn and we navigate and or is this problematic because the message it was trying to say was actually something I cannot get behind? But like I get obsessed with this intention of it all. So like Buffy, the first thing I thought of when you said that in my head, you're talking about your daughter watching Buffy. I'm thinking about, I really think it's Welcome to the Hellmouth. I think it's one of those first scenes. She holds up that dress in the mirror and she says, "Hi, I'm an enormous slut." And for some reason, that's the scene that popped into my head when you were telling the story. And I thought to myself, you know, I wouldn't want to see that on TV right now. But even when I watched Buffy for the first time in 2004, I didn't think that was weird.
Admittedly, it's pretty humorous because then she's like, or an Amish is the other dress or something. Like it's
right. Like, yeah, like it's played for all these different
so
right. But off the bat, the show about female empowerment starts with her slut shaming herself. Like there are just things that we wouldn't do right now, you know? And I know I've said this to Hansi, just that like there are things about especially Buffy that they just straight up didn't age well. And like, I don't know if they were, I give some of them the benefit of the doubt, like they came with positive intent and then they just totally didn't age well because like Debbie, I wish, that's funny, I'm gesturing to where you are on my screen. You might not be. I wish I knew then what I knew now, but I think that I wish we all knew then.
Right.
But
yeah. But you also have the problematic, you know, the thing about, a thing being a piece of its time. To give you an example, Mel Brooks films. Pick a Mel Brooks film, any Mel Brooks film. He could not get it, including Spaceballs, you could not get it made today. Because the script would just go down like a lead balloon. So do you watch Young Frankenstein or do you just, you know, take this entire comic shtick out of your repertoire?
Well, this is a huge conversation right now with warning. I mean,
wasn't Blazing Saddles getting considered by HBO for the same kind of like Gone with the Wind treatment?
That's what I was going to say. The Gone with the Wind, the Gone with the Wind plaque.
I mean, like there is that movement of contextualizing the information and the media and placing it in that historical context. But there's, I mean, I think there's also comedy is always going to be a weird spot, particularly not to excuse Mel Brooks, but if you're punching up, I really don't mind you dragging somebody. It's when you're punching down that's the real problem, and comedy is almost always going to have an element of subversion, which is why it's such a difficult beast to really wrangle and be like, yeah, that was offensive. And I'm like, well, yeah, that was my point, but I wanted you to think about it this way. Well, I didn't. All I heard was the offensive part. So comedy is a horribly complicated beast in that regard, which I think is why Buffy can sometimes, and other stuff that Whedon really is well known for, is that ability to rip your heart out and tell a joke in the same episode. And that was always something that made it eminently watchable. But it doesn't also, but I also get frustrated when people contextualize something too much. Like I was like my Mark Twain example. There were abolitionists during the 1790s. It wasn't like the only point of view was, well, slavery is fine. No, there were people who thought it was abhorrent and against, you know, the natural order as much as people who thought it was the natural order.
And so they wrote books.
Exactly. You know? They were not alone. there were movements, and that's the case for a
And
lot
Mark
of
Twain himself changed. He actually was against women's suffrage, was, you know, much more amiable to slavery, and by the time before his death, he had completely changed on those issues. So,
and I want to, you know, make sure we get to Jennifer and Hansi on this
My
question,
apologies.
but no, it's good. It's the discussion's kind of the idea here, but yeah, I think one thing about Whedon in particular for I will just speak myself as a fan is thinking about, okay, now we can also have the knowledge of looking at this person's, I think, Christopher, you were talking about intent, right? The intent may have been to be funny and to be entertaining and like to have these great female characters, but also the impact was Whedon is a white cisgender man who lives in a patriarchal, racially, you know, divisive society, and like all of these social systems are going to affect our positionality and where we are, like what we bring into the work. So I think it's important to critique both his individual actions and to see it as a part of a pattern of power structures in our society. Like, you know, you brought up Jacob Mark Twain, and that certainly there were abolitionists writing books, as Kathleen said, but those weren't getting the attention, right? And why is that? So we need to acknowledge that power structure that people are working within, and that's also why we maybe didn't, you know better at that time. Okay, so Jennifer, please.
Okay, well, yeah, I really want to, go on with what you were saying about how things do not age well. Like, I remember growing up, I was very young when Buffy started, and I was like, oh my God, she's like Wonder Woman. Here's like this young female character that has the strength not just to talk back to like a male-dominated society, stand up for herself, and she could punch men in the face and destroy monsters. And I was like, I love her. I love everything about it. And now rewatching it, I'm like, yeah, I don't even remember that slut remark because I think I didn't even focus on it back then. I was more like taking away parts of this that I loved. I loved this female superhero. I loved the dynamic of her and her friends, like all of them working together, and only together could they form the bonds that made them strong enough. They were flawed. They broke apart. Willow became like a drug addict. And I especially loved that episode where it was so sad when Buffy's mother died, and it was like Xander who became the strength to help get everybody through it. So these are the things that I take away from it. And same thing with the Harry Potter. I joined the world's largest Harry Potter fandom like a while back, the group that shall not be named. And we would like take over midnight movies where we all dressed up and we all went there and we just had the greatest time. And it is a very big LGBTQ friendly fandom. And I feel like that is the important thing. It was a safe environment, like you were saying, Lynn. And that is what I take away from it, that I have formed bonds with friends and this wonderful, safe environment where we do like try to support each other. And so like, even if we have problems with the author, we're like, well, we don't agree with that. We are here for each other. We are going to take the good things that this fandom has created for us, and we're going to move forward with that. So it almost feels like whatever you said, it's like, yeah, you can say that, but we do not agree with it at all. So yeah, we are going to take care of each other as best we can.
Thank you. And Hansi, did you want to add anything to this?
Well, it depends on my relationship to the text, how I feel about continuing to support the artist. For me, I can't really separate the artist from the art. Maybe because I'm an artist, so I know it's my voice. You know, I also work fairly independently, so it really is my voice. Whereas, you know, once you have, you know, writer's room and a film crew and, you know, there's a lot of other things going on there. But I still sort of feel that, you know, you can still be responsible. And even in the 90s, you know, you can be responsible about these things. And he was talking about those things, but then not living up to them in real life. So for me, that was just, and I just adored Joss so much. It was just one of those people that you can't enjoy the content anymore because it's so clouded by the creator.
And let's get.
We were talking a little bit about the death of the author thing, which, I mean, so I'm okay. Like I know Hitchcock was a bastard. He treated the women on his sets like animals. I mean, he was a monster. But I can watch his films because he's dead. So it's like, yes, he was an asshole, but he made great films. But it's not something I'm like a huge fan of either. So I think your relationship to the text really matters, whether it's everything to you or just work you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think that gets us into our next point, which is we've all sort of addressed it in some way, but more explicitly talking about how do we navigate still loving the content if the creator is a problem, or can we do that? Hansi, you shared that that's difficult for you, and for me personally, it depends on the content. And that said, for me, Harry Potter isn't the biggest loss because I didn't grow up with it. I was older when I came to it, so it doesn't have as much nostalgia. So that might affect this as well. But if folks want to address that more specifically in terms of how you personally have navigated that, or how fans that you've seen have held creators accountable and either continued to love the work or have had to let go of the work, as Lynn was saying, and kind of grieve and move on and go through that process.
Well, I've had a number of friends who basically have bought books up until the problem was found, and they haven't bought anything since. So, once they found out, they're like, well, I've read all this, I can read it again, but I really don't need the future, of this author's works, because now I know that there's an issue. And I'm going to just harken back a little. Hansi knows this. I started going to conventions when I was 12. I just turned 57. And when we went to conventions, there were a bunch of us, a bunch of teenagers, and our Pied Piper was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Martin. Sorry. Anyway, Dr. Martin was in First Fandom. So he was like an original, was at the first Whedoncon and all the rest. And he loved both the literary and the entertainment aspects of science fiction. I mean, we talked with him for hours about it. Anyway, he would take us, and then we got a collection of what we called our science fiction uncles. These were aunts too. These were men and women who were older than us. They were adults. They'd been in fandom for a while, and they kept us safe. And the more I think about different things that happened at conventions, or when we were steered away from somebody or something like that, it's because they had knowledge they were not going to impart to us, but they knew that it could be a problematic situation, so they got us the hell out of there. Also, if somebody was giving us problems, we had our science fiction uncles, and they usually found themselves out on their ear with their badge pulled. Because they were very protective of, they believed in bringing the younger fans in, and they wanted to make sure it was a safe environment for everybody in there. That being said, there were some authors who have passed, God rest their souls, but they were always problems, and they would always say something followed with the words, "Ooh, I was just kidding," if you showed any sort of negative reaction. Yeah, you'll understand when you're older. I didn't really mean that. I was being sarcastic, coming up with something to deflect. And everybody let him do it. It's like, oh, Bob, yeah, you know what? Just ignore him. He's old. He drinks a lot. You get all the excuses, but trying to figure out trying to find out what had happened that had led to this point was close to impossible because it was kept so close to the vest because everybody wanted to be inclusive in the science fiction. They do in fandom too. People love being inclusive. They do not want to be exclusive. But when something problematic shows up, you know, there may have to be some excluding of people who really don't need to be within the fandom circle.
Yeah, I've seen that definitely. You know, in the fandoms I'm in, you know, political choice has become a serious issue, you know, and I can see the fan dividing line, you know, where, you know, some fans are getting blocked or.
Mm-hmm. And then there's things like shipping wars, but that's not what this is about. So
No.
we're just going to say, we know that happens. We're going to put it over there. But yeah, any other folks want to come in on the creator? Yeah, Debbie.
I think too, and Harry Potter's an interesting one for me because I was a young teacher when Harry Potter came out, and I watched all of these kids reading that were never reading. And I was like, this book is awesome. It wasn't so much that I connected with it. And then later I had a daughter who did connect with it and stuff. So I do, even though I'm not the demographic, I do have this a great affection for Harry Potter, and it's just devastating. And the other thing that I think too, when I look at Harry Potter, or I look at things that have gone on to have a TV or movie life, is yes, there was an original creator, but then there are the actors, there's the crew, there's the director, there's a person who translated for a screenplay. Like there are a lot of other people too that potentially didn't have the intent of the original creator. Like you look at a lot of the actors on Harry Potter have come out and said, this is not my stand. I do not agree with Joe Rowling on this. And very adamantly, sometimes I think they've got to worry at jeopardy of their career or something like that. They're like, no, I'm going to make this stand. And does that, you know, do their creative contributions and get shelved if you completely cancel it? Like that occurs to me too. That sometimes it isn't just the original creator. There are a lot of people who have put their blood, sweat, and tears and creative energy into the thing. So just something to consider.
May I build on that, Debbie?
Yes.
Yeah.
Throwing me another. You and I must be on the same wavelength here, because what I wanted to answer to this question was, and by the way, I work with an organization called Whedoncon. So when I ask this question, it doesn't mean that I have clarity on it or that but sometimes I ask myself if it's not the pedestal upon which we actually put the creators that contributes to the problem itself. That like, I might go to the bookstore. Like there are book series I love that I don't even remember the name of the author, but J.K. Rowling is such an entity, a cultural touchstone, that she became inexorably linked. I lost that one. Linked to Harry Potter. So then when you look at like, this Harry Potter is, and I was one of those kids who I did like to read already, but I was one of those kids. I live and breathe Harry Potter, and I have so much Harry Potter stuff, and I'm having a hard time with it. I don't want to wear the socks. I think I might get past it, but I'm not there. But I just think about those pieces, all those art forms, or maybe it's because we're in fandom. Maybe it's all those people who were blissfully unaware. You'd be surprised how many people don't know. I want to talk about, say, Joss Whedon, and I rattle off every single thing I've ever worked on, and then I'll finally say, like, he directed the Avengers, and they're like, yeah, I saw that. They're like, there's so many people who don't know the creator the way that some of us in this community do so intimately, that I often find myself wondering if it's not the very framing of the question that messes me up in the first place. If I didn't worship these people so much, then maybe I would have just been able to move on quickly when I found out they were flawed humans. But
no, I mean, there have been a few flawed humans in Supernatural that the fandom is, and as a whole, had to deal with, and some issues from cons and stuff.
Well, to kind of follow up on that, I think we're also discussing, especially with this intersection of fandom and what Kathleen brought up, we're talking about the missing stair problem within fandom, where like this one person has a lot of power and they're able to utilize it in certain ways, and they also have a bunch of people who are willing to character witness for them, but then behind the scenes they're getting away with a lot of crap because there's a lot of power. And they're able to get away with stuff because people want the access, not just to be there, but like, you know, if you're especially running a con, you want those big names to show up. So you let certain things slide and you steer people away from them, and you try to minimize the damage that you know they're going to cause, which is acting in pretty bad faith, to be completely honest. And as a cishet white dude, yeah, we built the system to allow us to do that. And the easiest way to get away with it and to have your cake and eat it too is to play the nice guy card. Is to be like, well, I'm only like a -1. There's like tons of -9s and -10s out there. And I mean, like not to be like all call out culture or cancel culture. I mean, it's really just consequences culture.
Yeah.
You are having to face consequences for your action. And for the last 6 years, you've been the auteur director who has this insight into the troubled mind of the teen, can sell it to a 12-year-old boy and a 30-year-old woman. Aren't you a genius? You are the only one. And it's like, no, there were directors. I mean, like for Buffy, like I love Buffy. My favorite episodes, I can without even looking know, is either Marty Noxon or Jane Espenson.
Yeah.
It's that simple for me. Like I know that if they wrote an episode, it's going to be phenomenal, and it's going to be some of the more insightful and in touch episodes. So the idea that and same thing with J.K. I mean, that's part of the reason Joe Rowling is so tied inextricably to Harry Potter, was because everybody's like, oh my God, this world, they just fell into it. Like it was so accessible and so believable. It was like, this woman did this. But they also both suffer from hypocrisy. Like J.K. tried to get away with like, oh, but no, I'm super inclusive. Like Dumbledore's gay. She didn't put it into the book. She put it onto Twitter. And then when Twitter's like, cool, we'll embrace that. And then she's like, also, trans women aren't women. We're like, whoa. Hang on a second. Why do you
didn't mean to interrupt, but
no. I was very much at risk of going on a rant.
Fans of color have also been critiquing her portrayal of specific racial ethnic groups, and there's been some brilliant satire of that I find really inspiring in fandom. And I think I want to come back to Supernatural and let Lynn speak a bit about some of those issues that Hansi was bringing up. But I did want to add, I think power is absolutely part of this. And I think too, we need to think about, I'm really glad you brought up, Debbie, the point about when we think about these products, it's not just the author, they're more like a company. And to what extent do we want to cancel an entire company and all these people who, you know, the editor for Rowling may not have anything to do with Rowling's frankly incorrect and immoral statements, right? And all these other folks whose livelihoods are connected to this. I thought about this a lot with the recent issue with Roseanne Barr and the reboot of her show. And how it ended up being, people told me, I don't watch the show, but people told me that she left and then the show continued. And
show got so much better.
Mm-hmm.
The show
it's interesting to think about that. Yeah.
Greatly.
Yeah. And
after I knew what I knew about her.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to like the original show, but no.
And then just one more thing to add before I turn it to Lynn. The idea of the audience that you have, like part of why we hold people more, there's a few things about cancellation I've talked about in other formats. And one is in a fandom or in a community, once news is out about someone, you're expected to have an opinion of it one way or the other. And so other fans will kind of hold you accountable. I think that's kind of what you were saying, Christopher, about I don't think I want to wear this shirt because people in the know may just see that and immediately kind of jump to, oh, that's a statement at this point.
Am I accidentally condoning something? Like there's no,
Mm-hmm. And then I think the platform you have matters. So one thing I wrote about with Rowling is 14 million plus Twitter followers. And literally she said these things that are based on faulty science. And the next minute, just about, there was a legislator in the US trying to block LGBT inclusive legislation by citing Rowling, who is not a doctor, who is not a psychiatrist, who does not have the expertise. So irresponsibility, offense, dishonor on you, dishonor on your cow. You know, like it's, to quote Mulan, like it's like multiply offensive on so many levels. But anyway, so that's just one thing I wanted to mention. And then also, of course, the egregiousness of the offense. You know, making politically incorrect jokes is kind of one level. and then using your power to literally abuse and assault people or cause harm to people is, there's a scale here.
It almost goes back to what I was trying to say about intent. There's also like this intent to harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That has to be a factor sometimes. And for Rawling has really crossed that for me. That like I at this point, up till this summer, I might have been able to say she's working through it, but she has doubled and tripled.
Yeah.
And
she's now advocating. There's a difference between thinking something and saying something.
That's harm.
Like, I did know, I have a very good friend who did grow up in England in that part of the area and during that time. And she's like, well, JK wrote about what she knew. And that's what the environment was like there. So she's like, well, maybe she didn't mean to be offensive. She's just writing about what she knows. But since then, it's like even the apologies, it's like it's almost doubling down. And like you said, unfortunately, words have power. That like I have been a part of like discussions with other fans or been part of online draggings where someone will take what she said and use it like a weapon against other members of the fandom, where they have spewed such toxic hatred at people saying you're not a real person. And a lot of us were shocked at how much hatred there was there for like just like saying like, well, I'm a person, you're not. And it's like, where does this come from? It's like there's so much toxicity there. And because like the author kind of agrees with this, they feel justified. And it's like, how do you fight against somebody who can't be reasoned with like that? It's terrible.
Going to the length of linking a turf store on her Twitter feed, I was like, what are you like? What, like that? It's almost, I feel like it's an Onion article or something, because she's just going to such ridiculous extremes to obviously disregard people's feelings and have any compassion or caring at all.
Yes, and those of us who have been her loyal fans from the very beginning, we're like, well, we're willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she's just old-fashioned, has an old way of thinking, and we're like, oh, like our grandfathers. It's like, yeah, that's just the way they were raised. Okay, that's what we're thinking. Maybe they don't mean it. And then she doubles down on it and then triples down, and it's like, okay.
It's such an insensitive time as well, with what was going on with advocacy and protests about the violence against Black transgender women in this country. And it's just like, why this is you can't have the out anymore of I didn't know better, especially when you're a bazillionaire and you print your own money. And it's so obviously connected to the next book, but go ahead. I'm sorry, Lynn.
No, I was just going to say that, I mean, we're talking about power, but so much of this is about economic power also. And I think that another really conflicted area for fans is, it's true that even when you talk about a book series, editors get paid, like there's other people who get paid, but the person who made a fortune off of these things is J.K. Rowling, or is Joss Whedon, or is another showrunner or writer or creator. I mean, people make a lot of money. So I think it's really hard for fans to want to go continue to buy merchandise or to support the next book or to buy a ticket for that next film, because that is playing into that economic inequality that's already there, which is part of the power structure that caused the problem in the first place.
No, you're absolutely right. And the problem is, well, part of me wants to be like, all right, well, I may not like Terry Goodkind's political views, and I don't know that he was a bad person, but I mean, and again, not to speak ill of the dead, but it's, and I want to support that. The thing is, if your numbers are good enough, they will publish your next book. If you sell enough tickets to that movie, you have a better shot at making that next movie. If enough people buy your t-shirts, you can make another series. You got to make Dollhouse because of Buffy. It's Firefly because of Buffy. Dr. Horrible because of, all those things, that you build on that. There is that. So, it puts the fan in a much, it's weird that we now feel like we have to be the arbiters of of truth, justice, and the way of decency. But I mean, but that's the truth. I mean, like, it's like I love the Fantastic Beasts movie. I adored it. Newt Scamander was your non-toxic male. He was, you know, the woman was a better fighter than he was. I loved all about it. There was a Muggle who did a whole lot of cool stuff. I loved it. Can't watch the next one because I can't put money into it because I know that that's just going to be like, oh, well, then all those people who were complaining about it, they still came and saw the movie. I mean, like, I can't.
Well, I mean, people do compartmentalize, though. I was thinking of Ender's Game. And we all knew,
God,
like,
that broke my heart. I
creator's
did not know that as a kid.
racist, but they made the movie after the creator's like racist rants and like, I mean, it was beyond the pale. If you haven't looked up,
haven't watched the movie.
Card,
yeah.
But
where we're talking about people being affected by the original author, you know, being not canceled but censored, as it were, or being considered problematic. My husband is a writer, and he was working for a gaming company called Chair, and they were taking one of Orson Scott Card's novellas and turning it into a video game. So, you know, he does this and all the rest. He's known Orson Scott Card for years. As have I, and you know, so he did this and all the rest, and then the whole thing came out, and this was also the same year he won the GLAAD Award for Supergirl, and some fans were having some real problems because on the one hand, Orson Scott Card, bad, but Peter David, good, you know. So what do? Do you play this game because Peter David wrote it, or do you not play this game because the original material was Orson Scott Card's?
So this is, yeah, I think that's a really good point. And back to Supernatural, the thing that I was thinking about is that, you know, there's definitely problematic content in Supernatural. It started 15 years ago, so part of it is what we've all been talking about you have to look at something in the context in which it was created, including the time period. But there's continued to be some problematic content even throughout those 15 years, I would argue, right up until the present. It is not a perfect show by any means. So, I mean, for me, sort of putting my creator hat on, when I was putting together There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, which was intended to be a book that was going to celebrate the series and like really bring out the good things that the show has done and the way it's changed people's lives, both the actors who were on it and the fans who were fans of it. Then the question became, well, how much do you talk about the problematic content in a book that is meant to be kind of healing for fans and a celebration of the show? And I wanted to touch on it, so the book does touch on it, but I definitely foregrounded with the chapters that people wrote for it, the good stuff. And I don't, you know, fans wrote really powerful stories about how, you know, the character of Charlie inspired somebody to come out, and a fan who is trans was inspired by a non-binary character and by one of the real life actors, Misha Collins, who literally supported him through his transition. So there are these hugely powerful real life good things that have come out of this show, even though the show itself is sometimes problematic. And as the person putting the book together and trying to think of, you know, to get a cohesive message out of all these 39 chapters of the book, that was a real struggle for me. And I think that is the struggle for fans. Like, can we take the good stuff and still celebrate the good stuff while also acknowledging the bad stuff and trying to put it in some kind of a context? I don't know if the book 100% succeeded in that. I mean, I think it mostly did. It is a largely celebratory book, but I think that it does do enough acknowledging that the acknowledgement is also there. But there have been people who've disagreed about that, who said, you know, this is like a Pollyanna book. Like, you're talking about all these great things and, oh, how much the actors love being on the show and they learn so much from their characters and from the fandom. Isn't that great? But they also made a lot of money, and that's absolutely true. So I think that's a struggle.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I I think it's important to acknowledge too. I was thinking as you were speaking, of course, I have my own thoughts on Supernatural, some of which are in your book, but also Firefly, right? That fandom is one that I've really found inspiring in terms of all the activism and charity work that folks have done. And I went to Salt Lake FanX a couple of years ago, and they did a Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog auction. 800 people in a room, quoting, singing along, and I'm going, okay, I've seen this once, so I kind of remember, like yay much of it. But it's just so much fun to see that inspiration. So I guess just to maybe start to wrap it up a bit, thinking about ultimately I think this is a decision we all have to make as individual fans in terms of whether we can still love the work and separate the creator. As we've all kind of been saying, sometimes it depends on the situation, the product, etc. But to wrap up, maybe we could all kind of comment on a lot of you are creators. What do you see as your responsibility here with respect to these issues? And then if you are a fan, what is your responsibility, I guess, both as a fan and a creator for taking ownership of problematic content or staying away from it? Yeah.
And I'm going to say something a little controversial. First of all, I think creators do have responsibility. I think there are wonderful sensitivity readers that you can hire, but I have also come across in the author community sometimes there's a movement to get own voices, which I'm 100% for. I think we need more marginalized people writing books. But there have also been, I got a review of my book on Goodreads that said, well, if she's not Amish, how is she writing Amish Guys Don't Call? And I thought, well, Amish people are writing novels. And I did extensive research, and I did talk to a lot of Amish people, and I read a lot of Amish blogs, and they're not a monolith. No group of people are. And so, there are different groups that are more averse to technology, and there are some that embrace technology a little bit more. So and I tried to cover as much of that in the book and still have a fictional book. It's not a nonfiction book about the Amish. So, but that was something. And then I had proposed an idea to a publisher, and I had a gay character and a bi character in the book. And the publisher said, well, we're not a gay press. We don't want to touch that. And I think that's where you're like, we need representation. We need white cis people who don't just write about white cis people. I mean, that nobody wants to read that book anymore. We have to, and we have to hire sensitivity readers, and we have to try and do our research. But I mean, we can't just write our own sexual orientation or our own gender or our own. I think we have to strive for representation of different people, and still amplify the own voices movement, and still like really lean into that and try to make publishing more open to people who haven't been published before. So my 2 cents on the creator.
Well, one thing, it's easier to get published these days because you now have all these venues you didn't have before. But we need to get people who have stories, especially marginalized people, we need to get them into the spotlight. As a creator, honestly, my job and my only job is to give you my best work. Write you my best story, create you your best, the best puppet you've ever seen, stage manage the hell out of a show. But writing is a very isolated profession. You don't really get any input until you either show it to somebody else, or if you're published and you go to a convention and you're sitting at a table and somebody comes up and says how much something that you wrote 20, 30 years ago meant to them at the time and still means something to them. Then you get your feedback.
I don't always agree with that. I think that you can have, I think a lot of writers nowadays write with writers groups, and they hire sensitivity readers, and they even before it gets to a traditional publisher with an editor, or they can self-publish too. But like even before that, I think you have the opportunities to get a lot of feedback, and you should.
I'll just hop in here. So my recent film project has been a documentary about Joe R. Lansdale, and he's from Nacogdoches, Texas, the oldest town in Texas. And he grew up he born in the 50s, so he grew up in segregated Texas, like East Texas. He grew up in Gladewater. And during the documentary, we went and, you know, visited the theater he used to, you know, go to as a kid. And they had, you know, a staircase for people of color, had to go upstairs. And he remembers asking his mom about it and her saying, it's like that now, but it won't always be that way. And I think, you know, he grew up so aware of that. And then in his Hap and Leonard series, which is also a TV show on Sundance now, yeah, the two main characters, one is white blue collar, and basically, I mean, his brother, his best friend, is Black, Republican, and gay. So, like, you don't have to be those things to be able to write about them. You just have to be true to who they are when you let them come through you.
Agree.
He does a really great job of it. You love the characters, you know, and you know
that's a sign of a good writer. If the author can make you care,
yeah.
If the creator of the TV series can make you care,
Yeah.
then they've done their job. They have hooked you in and introduced you to what they had in their head.
Yeah. Even Bubba Hotep, you know, Bruce Campbell and Ossie Davis. You know, I mean, you got the same sort of buddy system. You know, they're both crazy.
I think that said though, that in this time that we're living in, with the conversations we're having as a country, as a society, and a culture, there's no excuse for tokenization, and there's no excuse for not sharing power and trying to create, using your privilege to create opportunity for other people. I'm thinking of, I love the Game of Thrones books. Okay. I'll just say that the series I have a lot of issues with, which we don't have time for, like Crowley rolling out the paper. Little know the GIF I'm talking about. But I don't think there's any excuse to not have diverse representation in media at this point. I don't care if the world is based on Europe or whatever. You can have people of color in this world. There's no reason not to, that I think makes sense to me. I think that we need to have a lot more representation so that we can avoid tokenization. I think we need to do much more inclusion and change the power dynamics for who's getting to tell the stories, who's making the decisions in terms of the production team, things like that. So that's got to change at a structural level and at an individual level.
And I think part of the okay.
No, please.
I was going to say, I just sort of going off of what Debbie said and kind of what you just said too. One of the things that I have found so helpful is having, you just called them a sensitivity reader. I just call her my friend who's an editor who's done that for me since forever. But I am always, as someone who like thinks about this, I'm about to go teach a class in 10 minutes. We're doing multicultural counseling. I'm a psychologist. Like, this is what I do. Never ceases to amaze me when I send her a piece of fiction, how many things she pulls out and says, is this what you really intended to imply? And I'm like, oh my God, no, because we are so unaware of all the biases that we carry around that we've been socialized into. So writing in a vacuum is a dangerous thing because we don't realize we have all these unconscious things going on. So I found it just, I big shout out to Alicia. She is like an incredible editor, and she invariably snags, I'm not talking 3 things, I'm talking 20 or 30 things in a piece of fiction that I cluelessly didn't even pick up on. So,
yeah, there are these like unconscious biases, like describing people of color by using food, introducing someone by their race, but not introducing the white people by their race, like things like that, that you really have to, I mean, there are essays written on it. You can go online and at the very least educate yourself on those things, which you can't do anymore. I mean, it's out there that it upsets people, don't do it.
And it's so helpful because then I'm not perpetuating these biases and stereotypes that I don't want to perpetuate. Jacob, I know I cut you off.
It's quite all right. No, it's fine. I talk too much. But no, I think to kind of try to tie all those points together, I think from as a creator, but most of my creations are by fan, for fan kind of stuff. Like, I'm not trying to write a book. I'm not trying to create a movie. I'm not trying I don't have a broad audience. I'm dressing up mostly because I like to dress up. I'm going to conventions because I want to have that interaction with fans. I love sitting around a bunch of people who've all read that book that I've read 32 times and arguing about the differences between page 14 and that edition. I love that. That's how my community is built. That's how my fandom is. That's who my found family has become. But that also, to tie into the personal thing and even the socioeconomical power of money and that kind of time, you have to be responsible. And as a cishet white dude who went through the Me Too movement and had to realize that I was not one of the good ones, I just was not one of the bad ones, and having to go through the Black Lives Matters resurgence and realize that it's not enough to just not be racist, you need to be anti-racist. The same thing applies to fandom. You need to not just be like, oh, but I didn't do anything horrible to someone. It's like, no, but did you actively make it better? Did you find someone who looked uncomfortable in a cosplay that you recognized and walk up to them and say, you look amazing, I'm so glad you did that? Are you finding people who are cross-playing, who are playing it in a different race, or who clearly are doing it their first time and it's homemade and are very insecure? Just go up and like you have the ability to make someone's day because you're doing it out of love. And if there's one point of connection we should have as fans, it's that we love that thing. And like it's not competitive. It's not tear somebody down. It's not you don't rip them apart. And you need to support the people in your circles.
And if you are a cis het white man or woman, but mostly man, and you hear another person over-sexualizing a cosplayer or making those sort of sexually harassy-ish comments,
you have to
interrupt that. Yeah.
You have to speak up because if you're not, you're approving it.
Mm-hmm.
Silence is complicity. I don't care if we're talking about the Holocaust or making fun of someone playing a Superman that's overweight. Shut up. They are Kal-El. You be respectful.
I mean, there is a way to do it in a kind way.
Yeah.
I was on a panel and it was two women on the screen and then a male filmmaker called in and the host spoke to the male filmmaker the whole time. So I reached out to him after and I said, you had two women just sitting on the screen. I know you don't mean to be insensitive or biased, but I just wanted to point out you may not be aware that you're behaving this way. And they said, oh, thank you so much. I didn't know. I didn't, so.
It's a good reaction.
Find a way to call it out that they can hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's about utilizing that little bit of power you have. Like, I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of influence, but I am big enough and tall enough that I can be like, hey, shush, she was talking, you just interrupted her. Or he was talking, or why are you screaming over this person? Like, if I have to just be rude and use my privilege as a straight white dude, I'm going to do that. It's not enough. I mean, and in fandom, it's especially important because especially when we're talking about fantasy or sci-fi, these are supposed to be aspirational. They're supposed to be inspirational. And if you can't separate what is from what could be, you're missing the point.
Yeah. Well, as somebody who's run, I don't know how many panels, there are certain conventions that use me as the 500-pound gorilla because I have a reputation in fandom among professionals is I don't care who you are, you will wait your turn. It's like, I had somebody comment because the way I tell Keith DeCandido he's running on too long, I punch him in the arm. But that's something we've been doing for like 15, almost 20 years, so he knows that's my affectionate way of telling him to shut up. But I have had other people, especially on like Sherlock Holmes panels, where you have some of the older fans and you have some of the younger fans. And especially if I've got like a young female, I make damn sure that she gets her say in there as much, if not a little more, than the older male fans. And that also goes for people with who are marginalized. I would rather hear their opinion right now about Sherlock Holmes than somebody who's been at this convention for 20 years and everybody knows what his opinion is about Sherlock Holmes.
I think, Kathleen, we should have you moderate the next political debate. But other than that,
not on a bet. You could hand me $1 million and I would turn it down. Jeez.
But I think Chris
I wanted to, I did
Yeah.
want to, Jacob said something that brought me back to what Jennifer said earlier that I really think is the core of what I wanted to take out of this. Jacob talked about opportunities that we can take to lift each other up. Mm-hmm. And Jennifer talked about sort of the Harry Potter community and how no matter what's happening at the top, there's always going to be that opportunity for warmth and positivity and welcoming and an embrace of all that is different and all who want to be there. And I think that ultimately what I've decided is that as a fan, as part of a fan community, that whatever you decide about what's going on at the top, the creators, by and large, they're only where the movement, where the fandom starts. And the rest of us, we are their legacy. Yeah. You know, we get to decide what happens with that world. And one of the first things, one of the reasons I said I would love to be on this panel is because no matter how you feel about what you decide that you feel about Joss Whedon or what you decide that you feel about any creator we've discussed here, that like what really I think matters is what you take from the work and most importantly, what you do with it. Because I said, Hansi asked me at some point early on in this conversation, I said, you know, we're taking this work because we all care about this thing and we're taking this opportunity to do something good with it. And that's what Jennifer was talking about with Harry Potter. And that's what Jacob was talking about with stepping in and using whatever privilege or power you do have, that we are the present for these fans and these movements. And I know I got real out there just now, but I mean, like really, but like the fact that we're still able to take money from that we can use Whedon's work to raise and give it to the Wooten Center for kids and their after school programs, and to the LGBT Center. So like we talk about Willow, so Whedon could have done better with his queer characters, but now fandom, we're picking it up. We're picking up that slack. And we're going to show that we have that support and that we have that intent and that we are there. And I really, what Jennifer said really stuck with me, and I really wanted to go back to that. And I'm glad. I had
a literature teacher once who we were debating a poem and what the poem meant. And somebody whipped out I have the author's intent for the poem. And the teacher said, I don't care about that because we don't know. We're not his psychoanalyst. We don't know what's in his subconscious. He might not know what he was writing about. So like, forget it. Like, it doesn't matter. What matters is I'm interested in hearing what you got from it and why you got it from it. Like what you can cite that gives you that feeling or makes you jump to that intellectual place or whatever. And I think that's true for all creation, is once it's out there in the world, you don't have full ownership of it anymore. Other people get to, have their relationship to it and claim their ownership and build on it and take it to different places and make it better than maybe what it started off or what it was interpreted to be when it started off or what the creator thought it was. Yeah.
Yeah, so
thank you. We should probably wrap up, right?
Yeah, but I just have two thoughts. One, basically we're all involved in fan creation, So what we got out of this is the fandom. So we can actually walk away from the creator and take that good thing. And there's this great Godard quote, like, it doesn't matter where you steal it from, it's where you take it to. And I always was like, yeah, that's like awesome. Yeah. It's true. It's like, where are we going to take this? So I think those are kind of sort of good notes to end on, that we can make it better by our own contribution and our commitment to inclusion, diversity, supporting other creators.
I think really quickly, we can just have everyone say where you can find them on social media, maybe to finish up. And I'll let Lynn go first because I know she has to go teach.
Okay, my students are probably like, where is the professor? You can find me on all social media on @FangasmSPN, and the website for the new book supernatural or peacewhenyouaredone.com. Thanks for having me. I'm
I'll
going to
add all your links
Thank
on
you.
Bye.
Bye, Lynn. Thank you.
Okay, and let's go with Kathleen.
You can find me, well, you can find my puppets at nostringsattachedpuppets.com, where I have a lot of work I have done. And also, if you ever want to commission a Buffy puppet, that's where you find me. On social media, I tend to show up as either Puppet Maker or Puppet Maker 40 on Tumblr and then Twitter and all the rest. It depends on whether or not I was the first one there for the word Puppet Maker. You know, and you can find my husband, Peter David, at peterdavid.net. And you can usually find him somewhere. You know, convention, online.
Oh yeah, he's always at conventions. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And Christopher.
Anyone who follows me on social media will be sorely disappointed. I can often be found at Darth Rosenberg 9, just an old Buffy screen name. I think that's what my Instagram is under. But really, I don't do much with social media. I do run the Whedoncon social media, so you probably all hear from me without even realizing it all the time. But otherwise, not that exciting. But like, if you're here at this event, you should like and subscribe to Whedoncon. That's here.
Right on. Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, well, I'm also not great on social media either, but you can find me on Instagram at WatcherTonks7. You can also see some of my work for Anxious Gretchen, which is my most recent one, at ecspencepresents.com. And on my Instagram, I think you can see a little bit of what I did for Tea Time for Mad Girls, who last year at FlameCon, they did their presentation of Browncoats the Musical, which was a fan musical based on Firefly.
That's great.
It was really good.
Fun because I got to play River Tam, and I designed all the artwork for it. So that was like double the fun.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Debbie.
I do have a website, which is woefully outdated. I don't think I've updated anything on it in at least a year. And that's Debbie at debbydodds.com. And I have a weird spelling of my name. It's D-E-B-B. Oh, I think it's up there anyway. It's D-E-B-B-Y-D-O-D-D-S. But I'm very active. I have an author page on Facebook and a private page on Facebook, and you can friend me there. And I'm very active telling stories and things on those.
Thank you. Jacob.
I got burned out on social media, but like a year, 3 or around 4 years ago, actually. Yeah, right around November, 4 years ago. But yeah, I mean, like we had a YouTube site, my fiance and I, Frog's Breath and Deadly Nightshade. That's on YouTube. There's only a couple videos, but it's us making crafts. And on Instagram, Deadly Nightshade works and Frog's Breath works because we cross-play Jack and Sally kind of constantly.
Oh, I remember you at DragonCon.
Yeah, we had stuff in the works for DragonCon, and luckily, safely, it did not happen. So instead, we're all in little boxes.
I got like 5 costumes for next year, so I'm ready to go.
Oh yeah, no, I'm now no longer behind schedule on building stuff. I'm now almost a year ahead of schedule.
Yeah, me too.
Wow.
You know, I happen to be in Atlanta right now, which is funny because I live in LA.
Oh wow, yeah. You are in the 2 animation hubs of the world right now.
Yep.
Thank you. And Hansi.
I'm Hansi Oppenheimer. You can usually find me anywhere Squee Projects is mentioned. So I have a couple of Twitter accounts under Squee Media and Squee Projects. I have a couple of Instagrams under Squee Media and Squee Projects. I have a couple of Facebook pages for my Squee Projects, myself, and then the Joe Lansdale documentary. And I have a YouTube channel. And I'll post all the links in the bottom of the information so you can find me and see my other films. And
Great.
And you're the brilliant mind who brought us all together.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you, Hansi.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm Tanya Cook, and you can find me on Twitter at, also like many folks, a little bit of stepping back from the social media, but I'm at Prof. Tanya Cook, and also at AK Nerd Fighting, which is my research project on Twitter. And I want to shout out to the Harry Potter Alliance for folks who want to be involved in fandom, but also support good charities and support activism work, especially on inclusion. They're an organization not at all affiliated with She Who Will Not Be Named anymore. Okay. So thank you. Any last things? Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Be
you.
safe, be kind.
Yeah.
All right.
Don't forget to love each other.
I'm going to stop recording.
All right.
Yay!